Aquaba. Welcome, friends, and I'm really glad you're here tonight. This is Amma Robin, host and guide of this great and groundbreaking podcast show, Espresso Talk Today. Come and sit with me for a while. Tonight's reflection is a soft but powerful discussion on why reading, especially in Black communities, is more than academic. It's liberation. We'll explore the stories we read, the stories we tell, and why literacy has always been resistance and joy. This topic lives at the core of who we are as Black people, our relationship with reading, with storytelling, with language itself. Not as something academic or elite, but as something powerful, something sacred, and of course, something joyful. So come as you are, grab a seat, and let's get started. Now, y'all know how much I love reading. I always have. Let me start this discussion with an experience that I had in high school. It was AP English Literature, Advanced Placement English Literature. As an always reading person, I was so excited about taking this course. I knew that it would involve a lot of reading, but also analysis, thought, and discussion. I was so in and so ready. Our first book of the semester, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. A classic, right? Well, I'd heard of it. I respected it. The writing was beautiful. The dialogue was sharp. The characters were engaging. But I didn't see myself anywhere in that story. And neither did most of the other Black students in the class, which was the majority of the class. We analyzed the book because we had to, but not because it moved us, not because we felt it. I understand, and I understood then, that I wasn't going to be able to immerse myself in every setting from every book we read. I did connect with Miss Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice because she was witty and independent, and I kind of felt I was too. And I had a major crush on Mr. Darcy. He was obscenely rich, kind of dark, and handsome. What's there not to love? I tried putting myself in the setting of the mid-1850s English countryside, but it just didn't happen. I was left feeling empty and kind of excluded, and I wasn't the only one. Then we started our next book, and that was Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Not The Invisible Man, but Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And that's going to, be important in just a minute. And that's when everything changed. The silence in class turned into raised hands. Our eyes lit up. We had something to say, something to feel. The loneliness, the invisibility, the code switching, the rage. We recognized all of it in the book. For the first time, it felt like a book in school was actually about me, about us, for me, and for us. That moment stuck with me because it showed just how deep the connection between identity and literacy really is. And for Black people, that connection has never been casual. Now, I want to just take a second and read a short excerpt from Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and I think you'll see what I mean. This is from the prologue. I am an invisible man. No, I'm not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it's as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition in the eyes of those with whom I come in contact. A matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. I'm not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. Then, too, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision, or again, you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you are simply a phantom of other people's minds, say a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that, out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world, that you're a part of all the sound and anguish, and you strike out with your fists, you curse, and you swear to make them recognize you. And alas, it's seldom successful. Wow. So that's from Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And that I could connect to. Yes, some of the language was very flowery. I thought it was beautiful and stunning, and the rhythm was wonderful. But the feeling is what really spoke to my heart. Reading has always been a form of resistance. During slavery, it was illegal for us to learn how to read. Enslavers knew that a person who could read was a person who might start asking questions, a person who could imagine a different world, a person who could not be controlled so easily. The always quotable Frederick Douglass once said, "Once you learn to read, you will be forever free." And we know he was right, because literacy changes the mind. It opens a door that can never be closed. And literacy has always been a form of power, especially for Black people. Frederick Douglass understood this deeply. In a world where enslaved people were punished for seeking knowledge, reading was more than education. It was rebellion. To read was to imagine, and to imagine was to hope, and to hope was to become unfit for bondage. And I think he meant that both mentally and physically. But none of this changed when slavery ended. Whether it's Dr. Carter G. Woodson, remember him, father of Black History Month, warning us about the miseducation of the Negro, or Ta-Nehisi Coates writing, "The best part of writing is not the communication of knowledge, but the creation of it." Literacy has never been neutral. It's always been powerful. And what Ta-Nehisi Coates just wrote there was amazing about the creation of knowledge. And it's also how we name the world. It's how we preserve our truth. And as Nigerian philosopher Achille Mbembe recently reminded us, it's not just about memory. It's also about imagining the future. Literacy, then, is not just a skill. It's a liberation tool, a survival strategy, and a declaration that we are still here, still learning, and still telling our own stories, and still feeling the joy. But here's something, and I want to make this clear. Reading isn't the only form of knowledge that we've had, and it's not the only way we've preserved our history. Listen closely to this. I hope you all are ready for this. Storytelling has always been at the heart of how we understand, remember, and pass on what matters to us. Long before we had written texts, although we've had that for a long time, but long before we've had that, we had oral historians, griots, and elders whose voices carried the wisdom of generations. We spoke our truths around the fire, in the fields, on porches, in kitchens, and through song. We encoded our survival into spirituals. We danced our joy and pain. We whispered our dreams into lullabies. These are not just stories. They are archives. And if you've ever heard the incredible, I really hope you have, Bill Withers sing Grandma's Hands, you know what I mean. That song isn't just about hands. It's about memory. It's about history. It's about love and protection and wisdom passed down through touch, through song, and through presence. That's storytelling too. And that's a kind of literacy the world cannot measure. But we know how much it holds and how much it means. Let me just read a few lines from the stanza of Grandma's Hands. I promise I won't sing it. I could never sing a song by Bill Withers. But here's a few stanzas from the song, just to get a flavor of this. Grandma's hands picked me up each time I fell. Grandma's hands soothed a local unwed mother. Grandma's hands used to ache sometimes and swell. Grandma's hands used to hand me a piece of candy. Grandma's hands picked me up each time I fell. If I get to heaven, I'll look for Grandma's hands. Bill Withers sang not just about his grandmother, but about all of ours. He reminded us that there's knowledge in tenderness, in rhythm, in lived experience, and in care. Long before we had written texts, we had oral historians, griots, as I said before, and elders, whose voices really did carry the wisdom of the generations. But that's not the end of the story. Colonial systems often refuse to recognize these ways of knowing as legitimate. And we're talking about now a Eurocentric perspective on knowledge. They told us that only the written word mattered. Only print on a page counted as real knowledge. But we know better. We've always known better. Storytelling in all its forms, the spoken word, rhythm, movement, folklore, sermons, even memes and music, is a way we assert our humanity and our dignity. And I'd also say it's a way that we use our creativity in communication. It's how we connect across generations, and how we laugh, how we mourn, how we teach, and how we celebrate. And today, honoring those forms is just as important as reading a book. And yes, as a person who loves reading books, I stand by that statement because it is just true. So I do want to encourage you. Tell your stories. Listen to the elders. Share what you remember. Honor the storytellers who came before us and the ones who are creating right now. Whether you're writing, speaking, singing, drumming, or dancing, you are a part of the story, and that matters. Some people will say civilization began with the written word, but we know better. African civilizations, long before colonization, preserved knowledge through oral history, through rhythm, through movement, through storytelling, music, proverbs, and even dance. And I also want to include drumming too. Our griots were our living libraries. Our elders passed down entire family lines and worlds through stories. We've always had knowledge. It just didn't always come in the form of a leather-bound book. So let's move on into how the black knowledge, our black knowledge traditions, and how we've always had our ways. Long before books, long before traditional sit-at-your-desk schools, long before colonizers claimed that they invented knowledge and basically everything else, Black people were already teaching, remembering, and passing down wisdom. In many African civilizations, knowledge was never confined just to the page. It lived in the people, and it moved through voice, rhythm, pattern, and this is often forgotten, presence. Let's look at a few of the Black knowledge traditions. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but griot. It's kind of a French term, so it's spelled Griots. Griot in West Africa, especially among the Mande, Wolof, and other peoples of Mali, Senegal, and the Gambia, were more than just storytellers. They were living archives. They memorized generations of history, politics, spiritual teachings, and community law. If someone needed to know who they were, where they came from, or how to resolve a conflict, the griot would have their answer, and the griot would speak it. And there's also Adinkra symbols. I'm seeing more of those around now, and I even have a few myself. The Adinkra symbols from the Akan people in Ghana are another form of communication. These symbols are visual, and they represent ideas like resilience, unity, justice, and wisdom. They're printed on cloth, sometimes carved into stools, etched into architecture. Each one tells a story and a philosophy in a single shape. Think of Sankofa, looking backwards, the bird that's looking backwards while still facing forwards. So using the knowledge of the past to move forward. Sankofa. That's a real classic Adinkra symbol. And then there's the call and response. I love this one. A collective way of speaking, listening, and remembering. Whether it's in a ceremony, in music, or in a village square. It made memory a community act. Drumming, dance, proverbs, rituals. These weren't just entertainment. They were that, but they weren't only that. They were also education. Our ancestors passed down herbal medicine, astronomy, farming knowledge, social ethics, and spiritual systems without opening a traditional leather-bound book. And that is civilization. Not pre-civilization. They try to sneak that in. That is civilization, knowledge, and wisdom from which many Europeans came over and drew from. Now, Black knowledge in the time of enslavement, I'm talking about now in the U.S., so there's 400 years of enslavement. When Africans were stolen and enslaved in the Americas, they didn't forget how to carry knowledge, and they knew that they had to protect it, to transform it, and to pass it along in ways that the enslavers couldn't decode. So oral storytelling became survival. Tales like Brer Rabbit carried the spirit of Anansi the spider. I've read some of those stories before, and those are stories about this clever spider who outwitted, many other animals, sometimes really clever animals too, and sometimes people as well. And these weren't just bedtime stories. They were covert lessons in strategy, in resistance, and in identity. Spirituals, the so-called Negro spirituals, were more than just songs. I promise you I'm not going to sing it, but I'm going to give you a little bit of mention a few here. They were maps. They held messages, like wade in the water. Yes, that's right. Wade in the water, follow the drinking gourd. Songs became the underground curriculum of escape, of faith, and of freedom. Kinship systems were rebuilt in exile. People who actually had no blood relation became auntie, uncle, granny, cousin. These words created new lineages and preserved cultural understandings of family. That's very common. I know in my culture, anybody that I know pretty well actually becomes a cousin. And older people become either auntie or uncle. I was called an auntie recently. So that's part of language that then connects us and ties us together, acknowledges us, sees us, and respects us. Quilts carried stories. Patterns told migration routes, mapped safe houses. Sometimes what looked like art was actually a code. Sometimes it was just art, but often it was a code and that there was a message in there, in a quilt. And the last one here I'm going to mention, in hush harbors, hidden churches, Black people reimagined Christianity on their own terms. They preached Moses, and Moses, was about freedom. They believed in freedom, and they developed a theology that said, we are chosen. We are not meant to be slaves. God is with us. So our knowledge did not die. It evolved, it traveled, and it's still with us. The way we speak, the way we gather, the way we know, these are all part of legacy and part of knowledge. So when I talk about literacy, I'm not just talking about the ability to decode words on a page, though that is important. I'm talking about how we make sense of our world, and sometimes that looks like a book. Sometimes that looks like a drum or sounds like a drum, or we find it in our grandmother's voice, or we find it in a poem spoken from memory, or we hear it in a Negro spiritual, or we just feel it. Fast forward to today. Some things have changed. We may not have laws keeping us from reading, but let's be real. Access is still restricted and limited for us. Libraries in Black neighborhoods are underfunded, or they just don't exist. Schools are pushing the same Eurocentric literature year after year. In fact, the whole curriculum is kind of a curriculum so white. And the books that reflect us, the ones that affirm our existence, they're either missing or very limited. And when they are present, when they are included, they're the first to be challenged, to be banned, or even removed. Books by Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Ibram X. Kendi, even books that center Black joy, the Black queer experience, or that talk about racism are limited, or really simply non-existent. And that's not an accident. That's not an oversight or a coincidence. That's part of a larger effort to keep our stories out of sight. But here's something that they never counted on. Us. They never counted on Black parents reading to their children, or even Black children reading to their parents. They never counted on us sneaking books into our bags, trading them with friends, building community book clubs, or creating entire bookstores for ourselves. They never counted on the power of Black bookstores. Wow, I have a whole podcast show on those because they're so important. Because Black bookstores are more than just retail spaces. They're gathering places. They're places where our stories don't live in a dusty corner. They live at the center. You walk into a Black bookstore and you see yourself. You see your past, your present, and your possibilities. You can feel safe and you can feel seen. And that brings me back to something very personal. I go to a lot of bookstores, and I go to as many Black bookstores as I can. And I was visiting Washington, D.C. once, and I visited a Black bookstore near Howard University. And I sat there for over an hour, just reading, looking at different books and just reading. And the interesting thing was that no one looked at me funny. No one followed me around the store. No one asked me to buy anything or prove or justify that I belonged there. I was just there, breathing, resting, being, just feeling joy. I go to a lot of bookstores, some mainstream and many actually Black bookstores, and I still feel so at home in the Black bookstores. And Black bookstores are like that. They can hold us, and they can remind us that literacy isn't just about achievement. It's about belonging and freedom and survival and joy. I always want to remember that. Joy should be at the root of our being. And I want to leave you with this. Today, literacy is essential, but it doesn't have to center whiteness. And it doesn't have to diminish Blackness. We can reclaim reading without surrendering our traditions. We can teach our children to love books without erasing the power of storytelling. We can celebrate oral history and written history side by side. Because liberation is knowing that our knowledge exists in many forms. They have tried to define civilization for us, but we have always known what it means to be whole and to communicate and to pass down knowledge. Our stories were never lost. They've always lived in us. They cannot define civilization for us. We have to define that for us. Well, I think it's time for me to start kind of winding down this reflection today on the literacy of Black America and literacy more directed without whiteness. First of all, I want to say Asante Sana Fam. Thank you so much for sitting with me, for thinking with me, and for remembering with me. If today's episode sparked something in you, please share it. Let's keep this conversation going. Support a Black bookstore. Listen to a child. Read to an elder. Tell your story. Before we close, I want to share a short excerpt from The People Could Fly by Virginia Hamilton, a story passed down from our ancestors that reminds us that our words have always carried power. Even when we were forced to shed our wings, we kept flying in our stories. Here's the excerpt. They say the people could fly. Say that long ago in Africa, some of the people knew magic. And they would walk up on the air like climbing up on a gate. And they flew like blackbirds over the fields, black, shiny wings flapping against the blue up there. Then many of the people were captured for slavery. The ones that could fly shed their wings. They couldn't take their wings across the water on the slave ships. Too crowded, don't you know? The folks were full of memory then. But the folks who could fly kept their power, although they shed their wings. They kept their secret magic in the words. It was the kind of magic that kept them going. By Virginia Hamilton, The People Could Fly. In closing, this is Amma Robin, remembering and thanking the beloved ancestors whose stories live in every word I speak, and honoring Frederick Douglass Lofton, my brother Doug, who walked with me on this journey with such deep love and wisdom and so much knowledge. Asante Sana for being here, for listening, for believing in the vision and the uncommon conversations of Espresso Talk Today. This is not a goodbye. This is a beginning. Our stories will continue, louder, deeper, and more rooted than ever on my new podcast show, You Ain't Imagining This. That's right. That's where we'll keep naming the truth, holding space for reflection, and telling stories that confront the chaos while celebrating the joy and brilliance of Black life. So stay with me. Stay curious, stay rooted, and remember now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe fam.